it's 1 o'clock now. Let's give it another minute just for people to get settled, and then we'll get started.
Thanks again for putting these slides together.
No problem.
They're all we need.
All right, everyone good to go?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on everything you want to know about the BMES Awards process. I am your moderator today. My name is Evangelia Bellis. I am the chair of the Diversity Committee at BMES. And we have our two panelists with us, Joyce Wong, who is the awards chair, and Jane Grand Allen, who is the Fellows Chair. So I am going to pass it on to Joyce in just a moment, but before we get started, I just want to let you know that you can put your questions at any point in the chat, and we will get to them as we can. We're just going to do a brief overview first to get started, to kind of get everybody on the same page, and then we'll start taking questions. So again, feel free to put them in the chat at any point, and we will get to them as we approach the question and answer part of the webinar. This is also being recorded, so don't feel the need to take a lot of notes. There will be a link to it at some point in the very near future through BMES. All right, so let's get started. Okay. So I'm going to pass it off to Joyce and Jane to tell you a little bit more about the Signature BMES Awards. And if you are looking for more information, more details, especially all those key details that we'll get into, please be sure to visit the website bmes.org/awards. That's where a lot of the information will be, and links to even more information there. So, okay, Joyce.
Thanks, Leah, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and we're very excited because I think this is the first time we're actually having a webinar, and we believe it's very important to have an open and transparent process. And so what we'd like to do today is as Leah said, a lot of this information is on the website, but if you have any questions, and I'm sure questions do come up that's after the webinar, please do reach out to any of us, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. So just to go over the different kinds of awards, many of you probably know what they are, but they're the Diversity Lecture Award, and then we have different levels, the Pritzker, the Robert A. Pritzker Distinguished Lecture Award, the Mid-Career Award, and then the Rita Schaefer Young Investigator Award. And before we go into the fellows for Jane, what we thought we would do is first go over the process with you and kind of tell you what the different changes we've made over the past few years in terms of making the process more transparent and standardized. So go ahead. So in general, there are different points or parts of a nomination packet. Really importantly, there's a letter of nomination, and that really is important because it then supports and states the case for the nominee. So we have a CV, and note that we have full or abbreviated. It's really important to keep note of the page limits they are for the CV. In some cases, you are allowed to have in the appendix or the supplement the entire full CV in some cases, so please look at the website for specific details. And then there are also recommendation letters, and then everything in the packet is, again, to support the case. So in this upcoming year, please look for changes in, as I mentioned before, there's a limited pages in the CV format, and you can probably appreciate why that's important, as many of you have served on review panels yourself. And so whatever you can do to make it easier for the reviewers to make is highly appreciated. And so that's really the reason why we're calling for limited pages and really being succinct and making the case. There's also a fillable form that's in the form of SurveyMonkey. And there's also nomination letter, word, and page limits as well. So next slide. Great. So again, some of the tips are, we have published the rubric and the criteria. And so please make sure that you hit all the points and give the relevant strengths of that nominee, because for all those different awards that I talked about, that I listed, that's listed in the slides, you can see that there's different emphasis on them. And so one of the points you'll see in terms of the rubric is the impact of the nominee's work. And so as much as possible, please use metrics or quantifiable data, because the stronger support you can give is then it makes it easier for the reviewer. So next slide. So another thing to think about before I go into details here on the nominator perspective is something we've done is we've tried to make it similar to the National Institutes of Health, the NIH review process. So just to be completely transparent and open with you, what we do is before the reviewers see the nomination packages, we have an orientation session where, just similarly how you do for study section, you have just basically so everybody's on the same page in terms of the reviewers, so they're all reviewing in the same way. And then in terms of the rubric, you give a score, and that's all given in the rubric. But then you don't just give the score, you have to give justification in terms of bullet points that then justifies what your score is. And we hold people accountable to that. So you just don't randomly put just any kind of score down. We really want to make the process just as standardized as possible. So in other words, so in terms of making it more equitable, so please consider on your networks carefully. So part of the issue too is thinking, should you nominate somebody? Remember, you will never get the award if you're not nominated. Okay, so that's one thing to think about too. And so try to start nominating eligible folks. So Jen and Kat, they're great in terms of if you have any question whether someone is eligible, they will certainly tell you their eligibility. And then the other point to really keep in mind is, I think over the last year or two, we've really seen an increase in the number of applicants and nominees, which is fantastic, which is great. But what that means is that there's really only one person can win. So it doesn't mean that the other candidates or nominees weren't good. In fact, sometimes we have very, very difficult decisions that we have to make. So we highly encourage you to have the nominee for the next year. So please resubmit next time. So next slide. Okay, and so I already mentioned the criteria and standardizing the requirements, and I think Leah is putting in the chat, kind of echoing what I'm saying about how we're trying to mimic parts of the process that we borrowed from NIH. So in other words, also providing the rubric and the review process. And something else we will be doing too is we will be publishing the members of the committee. We will be doing that soon. So look for that on the website. So those are the membership for both the fellows and the awards. And so again, we highly encourage you to submit more nominations. And as I mentioned before, we have this orientation session in advance just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And it's really worked very well the last couple of years in terms of making sure that we have consistent expectations for the reviewers. And so the other point is making sure the nomination process, that you understand that all of the rubrics, so everyone has the same information. The rubric that's published on the website is the same rubric that the reviewers will see and the reviewers use. And the other point is we make sure that we have a diverse pool of reviewers, which you will see once their names are published. And next slide. Oh, okay. So I'll hand it over to Jane, to Jane. And then Jane, if you want to add anything about the fellows.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. So I've been a fellow since 2013. And I've also been really interested in doing what I can to grow the pool of nominees. And when I was tapped as department or as the chair of the fellows committee, I generally try to soak up a lot of information from the suggestions that the fellows evaluation committee made about growing the pool of nominees. The BME staff had a lot of suggestions as well. And then just over the years, we've been working on making it more and more inclusive. So one of the things that we want to make sure that we emphasize in considering nominees for fellow is that not every nominee for fellow is someone who looks like me, a researcher in an academic institution who does teaching and research, but is definitely more on the research side. We also want to have nominees who are more teaching focused. We want to have nominees from industry, and we want to have nominees who have done a lot for the field of biomedical engineering, maybe from a service perspective. So we have a lot of people who are working as ABET evaluators. We have people who are working as NSF program officers. We have people working for the FDA and the government. So how can we make sure that they are also being considered for the grade of fellow? So these are some things that we've worked on over the years. And in order to evaluate their nominations, we have come up with criteria that make sure that we can assess their impact in the field in which they work, because these are all different ways that people can contribute to the field of biomedical engineering. And also, there's just based on the way that you are contributing to the field, you may have a different way that you interact with the Biomedical Engineering Society. And so we don't want to consider someone's involvement with BMES to be like positive or negative just by virtue of the fact that they are industry focused or teaching focused, because as a society, we don't always have enough ways for them to be involved. And so all of these things get considered, and this is part of the bias and anti-bias training that we do in training our evaluators. We've also worked really hard to bring a lot of that diversity into our nomination committee, fellowship evaluation committee, and so you'll see that is going to be posted very shortly. Next, I wanted to, if I can go to the next slide. Okay, so just as described for the awards, there's a letter of nomination. The nomination can be done by anyone, just so long as they are a BMES member. You do not have to be nominated by a fellow. So just so you're aware of that. We do have an abbreviated curriculum vitae, and I get a lot of questions on what should be in the CV. The abbreviated CV is only 10 pages, and I have seen many different ways that people have put together a CV. So in order to try and level the field, I've analyzed some of the recent CVs of people who were successfully nominated for and elected to the grade of fellow, and I've put like a list of the different sections and roughly how long these were on the website. So when you look at the BMES website, you could just Google BMES fellows. If you go down to the bottom where the nomination form is there's like a list of what you should include in the 10-page CV. Now, for those of you who are writing recommendation letters for people, and I encourage you to if you're asked to write a recommendation letter, do what you can to do a good job with that. What I'd recommend you do in writing a recommendation letter is look at a rubric. Look at the rubric and look at the things that we're going to be evaluating and describe those things in the recommendation letter, because and use the candidate's whole CV in putting that together. So if the recommendation letter just mimics what we can already see from the CV, it's not as helpful. We actually really would like examples that go into a little bit more personal detail. And so if you have written a recommendation letter for someone for another award that has a lot of different examples, then that might be something that you could look at as well. The more personal and the more examples you can give, the better the recommendation letter will be. And if you typically just write a short recommendation letter, just make sure that it, again, is not overly succinct and telling us what we can already see, but gives us new information. And in particular, I'd like to note that the rubric has information on not just impact, but some additional things that drive the decisions, such as not just leadership to the field of BMES, but also, or activity in BMES, but also contributions to the field of biomedical engineering overall. We understand that you may be involved, maybe as a nominee, may be involved as like a journal editor or associate editor, or maybe involved with some other societies. That's worth mentioning. But we also do want to know about involvement with BMES. So if someone has been strongly involved with other societies, but barely involved with BMES, that's a little bit harder for us to consider. And then also another driving factor in the last couple of rounds of fellow evaluations was contributions to diversity. And that hadn't been explicitly listed as a characteristic. So that's why we have it listed in the rubric now. So all of these different aspects were part of our conversations in discriminating between great candidates. Now they're listed in the rubric because we would like everybody to have the opportunity to describe what their contributions are and to know that this is something that we take seriously. Another factor in that we've done this year is that with the help of the BMES staff, we've given a little bit more guidance in the prompts for the nomination form to have some word limits. We found that some people were putting like 1,000 words into the prompt, and other people were putting like 3 bullet points into the prompt. So we've given some guidance in how long the responses are expected to be, because we want to make sure that everybody's on a level playing field. Actually, that was one of the things that made the evaluators really grumpy last year, was when they felt that some people were trying to circumvent the 10-page limit on the CV with putting a lot of information in the prompts. And really, this is why we have the word limits for you, is to equalize that. Okay, next slide. Sorry, I think that I've gone over this. I think the main thing is that if I really like this point about metrics and quantifiable data. However, if you are writing a letter for someone who's not in a primarily research focused area, use the metrics that are important for example, industry or teaching, or professional, more of a service-based role. So don't just think it has to be like numbers related to papers, patents, that sort of thing. Mention awards that someone has won, mention how they have been promoted, mention that they are mentoring people, and how many. There's a lot of things that you can go over that would be really helpful. We're not just looking for publications. And then the next slide. Oh, yes. And Joyce and I actually have been working together for a long time on trying to build a really robust pool of nominations for awards from a lot of different possible candidates. We've been calling this the binder committee, which I don't know if anybody ever really remembers what the binder.
Yeah, I remember that. Mitt Romney.
The Mitt Romney thing. We
Yeah.
talked about binders full of women. Well, this infuriated Joyce and I, and between me and Joyce and Shelley Sakiyama Albert, we've been actually working really hard to get women and nominated for a variety of different awards for years. And even just yesterday, I was looking at a lot of faculty thinking, who do I need to make sure is getting nominated for fellow this year? And we are interested in, if I send you an email saying, I think this person is ready, can you please make sure they get nominated? Work with us. We try to avoid conflicts of interest on the committee. So we should not be nominating people. We should not be writing letters of recommendation. If you're on the committee and you've already, or the evaluation committee, and you already wrote a recommendation letter, that's fine. But just kind of, we're trying to keep that at a low level of conflict of interest, because conflict of interest are going to be present anyway, because you're at you may be at an institution or like have a personal collaboration with or someone. We divide our evaluation groups into subgroups so that we can kind of avoid conflicts of interest as best we can, and just make it fair for everybody. But just so you know, if we ask you to, can you please help us put together a nomination for this person? We would really like to see them get nominated, but we can't do it ourselves. And I can't tell you how many people have been nominated multiple times. You actually do get consideration and a fair shot every single time you are nominated. So please keep trying.
Yeah, if I just to add to what Jane said about the conflict of interest, we take that very seriously. So we make sure that if there is a conflict, it needs to be at least voiced, and we handle it in a very similar way. As you can imagine, we're a field where a lot of people know each other and things like that. So we take that very seriously, the conflict of interest.
So that's all I had to go over. I will also note that both Joyce and I are very approachable. If I've had a lot of people email me to say, hey, what am I doing? What am I doing here? Is this CV is this arranged appropriately? I've given a dozen people feedback on, this is something that is a little bit more esoteric. This is something that we look at, and based on that, I decided to put together the list of what is typically in the CV for everybody to use. You don't have to organize it the same way I've listed, but those topics are what people have included. I think at this point, I think we're ready for questions.
Yep. So we are going to start the questions at this point. So thank you both to Jane and Joyce for your background in this presentation so far. I'm going to stop my share. It's a little bit easier to see faces.
It looks
okay.
like there's two questions, one in one place and one in another place.
Yes. So if you can please put them in the Q&A, the question and answer box if possible. If it ends up in the chat, that's fine too. We'll get to it. But we'll start with Shelley Payton's question in the Q&A, which is, does being nominated a second time help, or is it viewed totally independently every time, as in you don't look at the history of nominations? So I just want to chime in here really quickly, just from our perspective in the Diversity Awards. So the Diversity Awards were under the Diversity Committee. Now they are under the Awards Committee, but something that I can talk about that I've seen is that we have gotten amazing candidates, and not everyone can win. And it's so disappointing when we see someone who doesn't reapply, when we encourage their nominators to re-up them for the next year. We treat it always independently. It is not something that has a memory. Every year we treat them, as a new nomination. But please, 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 especially if you hear from somebody that you should reapply, that's a really good sign, and you should definitely reapply. And if you think of most of the awards, if you ask the award winners, most of them have been nominated multiple times. So don't ever let that be a reason that you don't reapply if you didn't get it the first time. It takes multiple shots often. So Jane and Joyce, if you want to add something to that that question.
I would just echo what you said, Leah, is that it's absolutely true that the winners, some of them have been nominated, you know, over the years, you know, multiple times. I would just echo that. So please, yeah, there is no memory. They're considered kind of independent each time.
Yeah, and I would say in particular, I have been looking at who was nominated in the past, but who is not yet a fellow, and I actually am planning on reaching out to some people who I know were nominated in the past and I haven't seen them again. I'm going to reach out personally to department chairs and say, can you put this together? I know, I think that this is time. And so if you don't have to be nominated again the next year, but don't think that that was it. This was not your one shot. If you think, can I get feedback? Actually, I'm personally okay with that. If you want to work on acting on that feedback and apply again the next year or in a couple of years, just absolutely, but don't give up and think that that was your one shot.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do not give up after that one shot. So we have a second sort of related question. I think we kind of answered it, but I'll put it out here anyways. Do you roll over unselected nominees year to year, or do you expect nominations to be resubmitted every year, ideally with an updated nomination package?
So I can start with that. So we do not roll over, and one of the reasons, as you could probably see, is that our goal is to try to make this process as transparent, but also, as Jane mentioned, you know, the grumpy reviewers, you want to make it kind of streamlined or kind of easy for reviewers too. So especially since we have a change in the word limits, like for this, so an old nomination basically wouldn't fit. So we ask you to update the nomination, so we do not roll over for those reasons.
Yeah, and I think that also as your qualifications are going to be different from year to year, you may have you know, just an exciting new activity that you would like to have discussed, then you should put an updated application in, so they're not rolled over automatically.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So we had some registration questions, so some questions that came in during the registration that we will now get to. And again, you are welcome to continue adding, questions to the question box. So one of the sort of really basic questions, and this is something that I feel like I would personally struggle with if I was thinking about this. Where do I start? How do I pick a solid nominee? How can I tell who would be a good fit? So again, I think this is sort of my junior bias, where I'm not as clear on how some of this works. And I've noticed that a lot of the nominators are often very senior people who kind of just know what they're doing. They've nominated many people in the past, but if we want to broaden our pools and get more people in there, besides the people that have been really good at nominating people for some time now, where do we really start? Where's a good place to start? How do you identify good candidates for either of these sets of awards? And
I can start with fellow. So just in general, for the grade of fellow, the level of academic rank tends to be people who have been promoted to full professor, or who are within a couple of years of being promoted to full professor. So that level of rank of course applies more to the research focused academics. For teaching focused academics, it really depends on just years of experience. And then for more service and industry, again, years of experience, kind of a participation is one of the things that it's expected to be more of a senior level rank. But as far as how to know how to get started, some people say, oh, I would really like to nominate this person. Well, they do need to be a BMES member, and they need to have been a member for 3 years. The 3 years, the 2 years previous, and then the current year during the year that they're nominated. And then they need to have been contributing to the field of biomedical engineering for 5 years for fellows. So I'd say, well, the first thing is think about eligibility. Because before you get in and put together a lot of application materials, it would be disappointing to find out that the person wasn't eligible to begin with. So I think that that's a good start. Joyce?
I would completely agree. I would do that first, because you don't want to go through all the work and find out that the nominee is ineligible. So I completely agree with Jane that should be the first thing you do, and that Kat or Jen or the staff, the BMES staff, can answer that for you. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, so it's maybe less clear cut than for fellows. I would say for the different awards, I would say that you shouldn't only look at the awards that have been given to the previous years, because that's not the point. Instead, I would say really focus on the rubric. Look at the rubric, and oh, good, they put their emails in the chat. That's great. Okay, for the staff. And so, but you would really start with the rubric in terms of the impact, and then I would say just to go from there in terms of just how strong of a case you can build. And the other point too is sometimes you may want to have, like Jane mentioned, that me and Shelley, would talk together. It's good to bounce ideas off your colleagues too, and just say, getting input from your colleagues and say, how can we help in terms of making this a stronger case, or what should you highlight? And I think, again, but really focusing on the rubric, the fact that it's a biomedical engineering society, those are the real aspects, kind of tying it all together, is that I would use that as a starting point.
And when you are when you're preparing the language that you want to put into the prompts, share that with your colleagues. If you are making a nomination for someone and you want to find out, am I expressing this in the strongest way, ask someone who has maybe a little bit more experience nominating people for awards. And just overall, it really helps your department to have people being nominated for awards in so many ways, because you learn what to be excited, and make sure the world knows about your people. It's a win-win situation to go through this. Even if you aren't selected, you will get there eventually with some sort of award nomination. And this is just one of the steps you have to go through to learn how to put together a good nomination.
And just picking up on a point that Jane made earlier in terms of like anti-bias training, I think people are aware of the literature that's out there in terms of showing that how people write recommendation letters, the wording that you use, absolutely, you have to be careful into avoiding bias and things like that, because we know that there are certain kinds of words that are used, whether you know it or not. And so I think you want to also be aware of that. And so one of the great ways is to share with a colleague and see, this is what I want to convey. Is this coming across? Just like you would do anything else. Just think of it as a process in terms of like how you want to convey the idea. And getting feedback is what we do all the time, all of us, right?
Thank you. And Jonathan in the Q&A has asked, what are some examples of BMES involvement that would make a fellow application more likely to be successful? I guess Jean will hand that over to you.
Okay, I'll start. So when I think about BMES involvement, a lot of people think about the annual meeting, and that is just one way to be involved. So you can go with, that could be reviewing abstracts. It could be helping to organize or serve as a session chair. And then just beyond that, track chair or maybe running a panel, serving on a panel. So I think it's good to note like frequent attendance, but we're also looking for some level of service beyond that, beyond just participation. So if you're asked to be involved, if you're asked to be an abstract reviewer, please say yes. They're really needed. If you're asked to be a session chair, please say yes, and also ask for help on how to do a good job moderating. I've definitely seen some people who kind of go in kind of green. We can help you. And then track chair and meeting chair. Oh, these are big jobs. But it's really exciting to get some insight into what it takes to put that together. That's big service, and we recognize that when we're doing the evaluations of the nominations. But then just serving on committees and chairing committees or even subgroups. This is something that happens year round. There are just additional ways to participate other than the annual meeting, and you can also be involved with the BMES journals, for example. So some people are associate editors of journals, just showing a record of like constantly reviewing for the journal. If you're one of the people that does that, make a point of mentioning it. So this is just some little examples.
Okay, and so just to recap,
sorry, I wanted to mention one more thing. If you're teaching focused, mentioning involvement with some of the satellite programs like BME IDEA is really, really important.
Okay.
We also have some of the subgroups too. Those are important.
Yeah, right.
So to recap, so that this is really clear, it's often service beyond just participation at the annual meeting is something that's really important to your packet for Grade of Fellow. So service can be any, anything that you mentioned really, but it's not just participation at the meeting every year. Is that a fair?
Yes, and I was about to mention something that Jen just posted, which is being a chapter advisor for your BMES chapter at your home institution is very, very important too.
Yeah, and that's often really fun too. I'm one of the faculty liaisons at ours, and it's a great chance to get to know the students better. So it's a fun experience too. If others haven't done it, I would definitely recommend it. Okay, and then we had another question sort of related to the fellows part of it. Dr. Grandy Allen mentioned that nominees and nominators can reach out for feedback if they do not win or do not get the rank of fellow. Is that automatic, or do individuals need to find someone on the award committee that would be willing to share feedback?
So I feel, number one, now that we are going to be having our membership posted, I think that everybody should feel free to reach out to someone, and it's going to be hard we cannot generally comment on individual applications, but we can just say, well, let's take a look at your CV. And let's take a look at like we can't really look at recommendation letters or things like that. That's confidential, but we can always look at the 10-page CV and just say, well, let's find a way of putting your best foot forward here. I've done this many times. I will be letting my committee know, here's, if you are contacted, here's what's okay to give feedback about. I think that everybody is interested in knowing, what could I have done better? I think we are a small community. I think we are also a community that deeply cares about each other. I don't see a problem in helping people who ask for help, but it's generally not an automatic feedback thing. The nature of our kind of evaluations are kind of kept in those spreadsheets and rubrics that are evaluate, that are kind of compiled just for internal committee stuff, those aren't shared.
Yeah, I would actually caution against, okay, so first of all, number one, in the spirit of full transparency, the names of the committee members will be posted. However, while you could reach out to them, I think really, again, thinking about NIH, as you probably know, those names are published on study section, but you are not supposed to contact them, right? So I would say instead you contact the chair, like me or Jane, instead, and there are reasons why, right? Because as you probably know, to get reviewers on here too, it's a safe space, right? Where people kind of, discuss the review and everything like that. We can talk and give you general feedback, I think, but as you probably know, these are all, I mean, you've all been on review panels yourself, right? And so I think it's important to realize too that as we've all said too, we get so many great nominees. You can only have, in the case of the awards, you can only award one. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that it just happens, right? There's really, really excellent candidates.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the feedback is just submit again. And I'm sorry if that doesn't sound a good enough response, but unfortunately, the only thing I can say is you yourselves have been on review committees, and you can see that, right, when you do things. So I think we want to be careful in terms of like promising the kinds of feedback and things. Certainly we can talk about, if something was unclear or something like that. And we have reached out, for example, in some cases where, let's say maybe it's missing different pieces of the package or things like that. But I would caution on going, like too far on that, because you really want to understand that, as Jane said, that these are really kind of internal. These are, again, for conflict of interest and confidentiality, we have to be really careful on that and that part. That's what I would just add.
Okay. Well, I think for consistency of feedback, if the people contact me, then that would be the most consistent feedback. And I've rarely said no to these sorts of things.
Oh yeah, no. I'm saying, but I caution on them like contacting like people directly on the committee. That's what I'm just saying, because then that's a issue too in terms of consistency. So I think like between, as Jane mentioned, she and I talk quite often, so we're at least consistent. So I think that's probably the better way to go, is to contact either of us or Kat and Jen, and they put their names in the chat.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So we definitely want to be careful that, you can't just go asking anybody on the committee if you have general questions, because we can't talk about these awards in detail or any specifics of the awardees packet, right? We talk to the chairs if we have general questions, but we can't talk specifics because that's sort of all confidential, right? I just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Was earlier there was this comment about how we're asking for people to be nominated. Just to be clear, this is not that we're soliciting specific people. We're encouraging people to be encouraging people to submit nominations, but we're not trying to target or solicit for specific people. That would not be the way that we are going about it.
No.
So I just want to make sure that was clear, because it came across a little hazy there. So, but we do, one of the things that I think we're all trying to do better in our committees is provide more opportunity to sort of market these opportunities and to put them out there to make sure that people know they exist. Just to talk about a smaller award is these career development awards that the diversity committee has overseen, and those often people don't know that they exist. And so one thing that we're just trying to do is making sure that people know they exist, although they are not open this year because of the trouble with pandemic issues. But every other year that they've been available, there's been so many comments, oh, we didn't know these existed, and that's on us to do a better job of advertising what's available and, you know, making sure that we're putting it out there and talking to the people that would be able to nominate. But we are not, you know, necessarily soliciting certain people at all. To make sure that was clear.
Well, one thing I would like to just note, though, is that the first year I was Fellows Committee Chair, I tried to just see organically what kind of nomination pool we got. And I was only 10% women. Was when we didn't kind of beat the bushes and say, hey, we're here, please apply for this, without advertising and reaching out to communities, you don't get as diverse a pool as you would like. And so we have tried to make sure that, are we reaching out enough? And I am looking, if I'm looking at people who were nominated in the past and I'm thinking, you know, why shouldn't this person be applying again? We will contact some former nominees. So as much as that is solicitation, I think it's just a reminder that you can apply again and we would like you to.
And the only thing I would add to that is just to remember that over the past few years, we've been making changes to the process to make it more open and transparent. So the rubrics are clear. Everybody has the same information.
Yeah.
And so you should not rely on kind of who past winners were, because you have to remember that was maybe an older system. So again, I just come back to the point, if you're not nominated, you definitely won't get it. So that's the only point I say, that by the whole kind of goal is to get all of the information out so we have a level playing field so everybody knows the same information.
And I think a lot of that has to start with reminders of eligibility.
Yes.
If these are what we're looking for in terms of you know, rank. These are what we're looking, and for people who are at that rank, that you're, you know, in your department or in your colleagues, if they've been a member for 3 years and if they've been in the field for longer, they should be nominated. And I think that that's what I would like to see, is more nominations.
5 years.
Membership for 3 years consecutive, and then engagement in the society for at least a total of 5 years.
Okay, I see. Okay, just to make sure that was clear. Okay, so let's move on to another question that was in the Q&A. So far, the advice has been towards nominators. In my experience, nominators often ask the nominee to draft a significant portion of the nomination letter, something that personally makes me cringe anytime I've had to do it. Any suggestions on this aspect, or just for nominees in general? And maybe Joyce, why don't we start with you on this one?
Well, okay, so I think what you want to do is, again, I know I may sound boring, but I'm saying the same message, is really going to the rubric and seeing kind of what you're going to be evaluated on. Mm-hmm. And that's different for each of the different awards, right? For the fellows, again, Jane has explained what those are. So I think just the strongest case, again, tying back into what we said, quantitative metrics and really telling a story, right? Like, I mean, because remember, your CV can tell something, but the CV should support what that letter is saying. So I don't know if that helps at all, but essentially the point is a stronger case that you can make, again, tying it back to the rubric, which is public.
Right. And making sure that there are sort of metrics in a way wherever possible. And I don't want to say metrics, like when I say metrics, don't think H index. That is like not at all what I'm talking about.
Yeah, because if it were just H index, you wouldn't need a committee.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, impact, you know, for specifically say the diversity award, this is something that has been so difficult to assess because, you know, impact is so different across different, you know, spaces, right? And so wherever you can tie a little bit of something metric or quantifiable, like it's really helpful. So, if you helped, 200 high school students in this program, list that it's 200 high school students, or that you, how long you helped them, or some tangible outcomes of the programs that you work with. That is really helpful for us to assess the impact that you've had. So I assume, these things sort of translate over to the other awards. I mean, I can speak more directly on the diversity award, where it's such a challenge because so many people are doing awesome things, but try to tie the outcomes and the impact in wherever possible, because that really helps us start to compare a little bit. But it's still an apples to oranges comparison in diversity related efforts. But again, add those quantifiable outcomes if possible for those awards.
And then also the letters of support need to, like, that's why they're called letters of support. So they need to then support the case that's being made.
Yeah, and sort of elucidate whatever's not on that CV.
Exactly.
Right. So that's the thing that's been mentioned a couple times, is that CV is important, but whatever's in that letter or letters of support need to go beyond that CV and highlight all the things that couldn't be listed in there. So that's really important. That's where sort of the impact piece really shines, is in those letters. And so make sure that that's really covered, because that says a lot.
And then supported by evidence in the CV, right? So think of it holistically as it all kind of comes together, right? You have to have, you can't just say empty words that's not backed up by anything either, right?
Right.
And practically speaking, I mean, I understand being asked for a letter or being asked for a draft of a letter. I have asked, I mean, I write my own letters for people. I have found, though, that if I ask the person, what are 5 points that you want to make sure I make in this letter, that can be helpful. So if there's something, again, that cannot be gleaned from the CV that you want to make sure people know about, like providing like a list of things to include can be helpful. This person is writing you a letter, but you want to make sure that that they do you a solid, and that letter really speaks to what you want. So just provide them with some points.
Yeah, that's a really great tip, and I think that's great for any kind of letters of recommendation.
Yeah.
Make sure that they know what you need in there. Okay, so there are no more questions in the Q&A right now, so I want to go back to some of those pre-registration questions, and some of them related to the CV. So especially when we're thinking about a condensed or abbreviated CV, aside from looking for what's already in the criteria for what's being looked at, what is the best way to organize a CV for these awards? And so that's kind of like a beast of a question, but are there any general tips that would be helpful?
Well, I'd put honors up front. There's things that can be up front, and there's things that can be in that. Now, Joyce has some CVs that are 5 pages and 10 pages. It's a little bit longer, but it's not overwhelming. And that's one of the things I really like about these abbreviated CVs. I would, honors experience up front. In the, honestly, your publications can be towards the back, and you cannot list all your publications, or maybe you can. But one of the things that is useful for me is just anything you were invited to, like an invited lecture, or don't omit that, and make sure that it is not missed. I think it's a great point about how you are regarded by your peers. And so I would say, like, publications and funding maybe towards the back. Service is important. I would not put service at the very end. I would actually, in terms of your contributions to BME, I would put that maybe after your honors.
So I would just add to that again, looking at the rubric, I'm going to sound like a broken record, like looking at the rubric to guide you, but then also some really good guides are, for example, the NIH BioSketch template is another really good, because a lot of the points that Jane mentioned are covered in there in terms of that order, or National Science Foundation or NSF type of CV. Because remember, the reason why we're asking for abbreviated is you don't want to have the reviewer kind of search through like 100-page CV, right? That doesn't do you any good, actually, right? The more you can make it clear and have that information that, again, supports, ties together with the letter of nomination, with the letter of support and everything, that just builds the strongest case. I think that it's in your best interest to make it most succinct and easy to find.
And if you have to like collapse a category down and just say that there were, 10 additional papers from this time point that they're, that are not the most recent ones, just list that.
Yeah.
And you can also kind of make it like work for you a little bit more, maybe like, underline undergraduate co-authors or things like that. It's okay if you work a little code in. It's all right. That gives us more information.
Is it possible to do what we do for NIH BioSketches, where we put the sort of PubMed link to, or my bibliography link?
Great idea.
Yeah, so maybe you just put like the last few recent publications and a link to your full list. Is that something that seems acceptable?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just depending. If you have like, so for teaching focused faculty who want to focus on like awards their design teams have won, that that may be a long list. Think of ways that you could consolidate things, like maybe list an award and then like all the different years your design teams won it. If you need to kind of flip some categories around and do some restructuring, if you have time to, you could probably fit a lot more in.
Yeah, and I think so Jane, something you mentioned too with industry, I know industry has completely flipped CV. I've seen industry colleagues, and they emphasize much different aspects in terms of their role on getting a product approved by FDA. And so again, it really, as you mentioned, it really depends. Again, looking at the rubric and thinking about what category you're in. And the point I would say about the long bibliography list is that it's really important to, again, make sure that the reviewer doesn't have to dig for that information. Really highlight the key papers that you think you want to be highlighted. Because I believe in the Rita Schaefer one, there are you're allowed to give the publications of those, I believe. The actual publications, yeah.
And you can put what you want into the CV. But what I've listed are things that we also look at. So make it work for you, but don't omit service. So say you have a lot of service to SFB, Society for Biomaterials, that you want to show is part of your broader contribution to the field. But you're like, oh, but I have too many papers. Ditch the papers. Put a summary of the total number, include the ones that you're most excited about, and tell us about your contributions in terms of service.
Okay, thank you. So we are down to the last 2 minutes. So if there are any urgent questions, please get them into the chat or the Q&A now. And I'm going to ask, a really hard question of you two now, and I hope you're not going to hate me for it, but it's a really challenging question. So what happens when a nominee comes from an underrepresented background and does not have necessarily all the same merits that someone from, is trained in a big lab and had a lot of sort of easier time on certain on reaching certain milestones, we'll just put it that way. How can we ensure that they aren't unfairly dinged for having a slightly different background? How do we work with that in the awards?
I can take that to start. So I think what's really important for everyone to realize, right, is that what the review committee takes very much care in is where is the starting point of the nominee. And Leah, we've had discussions about this for the diversity award. right? So I would tie not only to like what their background is, but what their current resources are. So somebody who's a department chair, right, who may have a lot of resources versus an assistant professor in a smaller school or college or university will have very, very different starting points. So I think the committee is very much aware that you may start off at different points. And so again, that's something that I think is very important to highlight out kind of the delta, right? The delta change. So that's where the nominator can really help in terms of educate, because the more information we have on that, because we are very interested in understanding the whole context of everything. So I would say, no, first of all, that shouldn't discourage you at all from being a nominee. But if anything, I think the more that you can educate the committee in terms of what is kind of the kind of starting point, that would be very, very helpful, because in a sense, it's the hand you were dealt, and that's something we very much consider and would like to know information on. But again, that's information the more I just really have to emphasize, it's what's in that package. So if you can provide that information, that would be extremely helpful.
And I think that really is a message that we have to, and we consistently do, share with the committee before we even start looking at the applications, that that here are our values, and evaluating just the whole candidate, including what they may have had to overcome along the way, is part of what we consider, is that some of them may have not started with the same advantages as others. And so that is, and not only that, but I have been working on kind of thinking about that in terms of the people I've invited to be on the committee. And also when I've invited people in these circumstances to be on the committee, and they say, I can't right now, that's fine. I will remember them. And, I don't want to create like unfair burden on, asking for underrepresented minorities to, again, do all the service. But, I will have conversations with them. And what would you like us to make sure that we consider, even if you're not the person evaluating? And so I think just really informed messaging and reminding of our values. And like Joyce said, having a rubric that helps to standardize things, I think, is what we're hoping is going to make it a very equitable evaluation, regardless of the candidate circumstances.
Yeah, and just to hit that home, we make sure to as what Jane said, making sure that all the committee members understand the values. That's what we have in our pre-orientation session before anybody opens up any package, that we make sure that we have that we're all on the same page. So we've had kind of that pre-meeting, just like you would have the NIH pre-orientation meeting as well for study section.
Okay, thank you both for a really informative webinar. And so this is it for us. If you have further questions, you know who to contact now on the BMES staff side. They've put their information in the chat, and they did it just one more time. So Jen and Kat at BMES, they are staff there that can help answer your questions. Just to recap, really be careful. Look first at the eligibility when you're nominating people. Make sure they are eligible, and then make sure when you are nominating them that you are hitting everything that we are looking for on those rubrics. That is key. That is exactly how you're assessed. That is part of this, transparency and how these awards are given out. So if you are not covering everything in that rubric, you are not doing your nominee any favor. So make sure you're hitting on all of them. Make sure you're reporting impact wherever you can. Make sure things are supported in the CV, and the CV is highlighted and curated in a way that supports whatever you need to highlight for that specific award. So I hope you all found this helpful. I definitely learned a lot. So I think that's great. And you know who to reach out to if you have any questions. So thank you for your time, and thank you for to our panelists and to the BMES staff that were really helpful in putting this together.
Yes.
And remember, June 30th is the deadline.
Yeah, yeah.